Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lady Leadership, the podcast that celebrates and amplifies the voices of inspiring women leaders around the world. I'm your host, Sam McIntyre, and today we have a very special guest joining us. She's the founder of PepTalkHer, a platform dedicated to empowering women in the workplace and helping them reach their full potential. Please join me in welcoming the incredible Meggie Palmer.
Well, you're very kind. Hello, and hi to everyone listening. Nice to be here. I'm excited to have a conversation today.
Thank you so much. Now, I love your energy because you're coming to us from New York, and we just talked about this earlier, and you are a night owl and you look incredibly fresh. And
I am a night owl.
It's you said it's midnight over there, so thank you for taking.
Listen, I'm just getting started. I was saying to you earlier before we started recording, like my ideal is like sleeping till 9 or 10 a.m. and then work till like 1 or 2 a.m. So there you go. Shout out to anyone else who's the same.
Perfect. Now, I'm really thrilled to have you here on the show. As I mentioned before as well, I've been following you for a few years and I absolutely love the work that you're doing. And likewise. I think it's always a great conversation when we talk about women's leadership and empowerment.
Listen, I would love to talk about this stuff all day. And I also, hope that one day both of us are out of a job because I hope that this isn't a problem forever. But anyway, we'll get into the semantics of the stats and how bad they are and the fact that sadly, we'll probably both be employed for a little while longer, unfortunately, because these are seemingly intractable problems. And the United Nations is hypothesizing that we're looking at 100 to 200 years before we get to parity. So not ideal, but listen. Progress is progress, I suppose, but we've got a long way to go.
We've got a way to go. And it's crazy, isn't it? And I do, like I see, because I've got children a little bit older than yours. So I've got like a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I see their generation being slightly different. And I do see their eyes being opened. And I do kind of believe with, people like myself and yourself raising children that we're opening their eyes up to different roles. And but I also know with my own mother, when she was pregnant with my older brother, the expectation was that she'd finish work straight away. So we have moved on, but you're right, we're not moving quick enough.
Not quick enough for our liking anyway. Well, and for everyone's liking, because the thing is, like, it's not just like a statistic that's like in a report and occasionally mentioned in Parliament. Like, it's a big deal. Like, we're earning 20% less. We're retiring with woefully enormous amounts less than our male colleagues. And that's a big problem because when we don't have financial means, we don't have choice. And when we don't have choice, we don't have freedom. And that's a hugely problematic situation because you have women that are forced to stay in relationships that are abusive or unhappy, or women that have to continue working into their 70s and 80s because they cannot afford to retire with the cost of living. So it's not just a statistic that we should sort of talk about. That's like this kind of thing out there. Like this is actually our lives. It's our aunties and uncles, our aunties, it's our mothers, it's our, hopefully not, but possibly our daughters, I'm just so passionate about this stuff because I can give you an example. One of my very good girlfriends, she's turning 50. She's in credit card debt. She's got no retirement savings and she's in credit card debt and she doesn't own any assets and she's 50. And I'm worried about her because she's staring down the barrel of like a really bad retirement situation. And so I'm trying to help her to be like, we've got 10 to 12 years, like, let's get this fixed, but it's not easy. It's easier if you start earlier. It would be easier if she had been paid fairly, all those sorts of things.
Oh, I think, I hate to think of what I've been underpaid in my career. And you said it at the start when you talked about choice and having choice. And, it's interesting because there's a story that I have when I was younger. My mum went away for the weekend and it was my dad and I, my brother wasn't at home. And my mum had said to me, can you iron your dad's shirt? And I was like, why would I iron my father's shirt? Like the man's he's an aircraft engineer. Like he knows how to use an iron. Like it's not that hard. But there was this expectation that because she wasn't there, that I would support that. And I always just was like, I don't want to be that woman. I want to have my own choices. I want to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. I do. And she always worked and she didn't, but she also probably did more around the home than my father did. And I was just like, that's not how I want to set myself up. I want to set myself up that that being with a man is an added addition. It's not a requirement. And I always want to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. I always want to be able to support my family on my terms and have choices. Yeah.
Listen, I agree with you. And it's funny, actually, I was talking to my partner about this tonight. He'd listened to a podcast where someone was doing pre-marriage counseling. And we haven't done pre-marriage counseling, but anyway, in this podcast, they were saying, like, before the marriage ceremony or whatever, like, this therapist had recommended that they both get a piece of paper and write down the percentage that they expect to care for their child, future children. So they said, like, okay, 1, 2, 3, we'll write down the number and then turn it over so you can't see it. And then together they 1, 2, 3 turned the piece of paper over at the same time so they could both see what each other had written. In this particular case, the gentleman had written 25%. And the female partner had written 75%. So that was their expectations. And they were both quite happy with that, by the way. She wanted to do more of the caring, and he didn't. He wanted to do about a quarter of the caring. So in that instance, it's not what I would have done, but that worked for them as a couple, right?
Yeah.
But the problem becomes when one partner says 25% and then the other partner says 25%, or one partner says, and there's a mismatch. And it was funny, Ryan and I were talking about this, and we were sort of talking about, where do we sit? Ideally, our ideal for our family is 50-50. And right now it's probably skewing he's actually doing a little more than me. He was saying 60-40. I was like, probably 45-55, for a variety of reasons. But he also, in fairness, acknowledged that I'm doing other logistical stuff that's not necessarily child caring, but I'm like organizing new toys, and I'm organizing this, and I'm organizing what, like, forest school opportunities there are for him in New York, which is a whole nother conversation, and different nanny options. So there's like the hands-on caring, and then there's the other mental load,
the organizing
component. So we were sort of talking about that.
There's the mental load. Someone's written a book about the mental load of women. And it's funny that you talk about this. And I remember a time, right? And this is, so I have a very secure marriage. I've been with my husband for 23 years, but I think one day I got really fed up one day, right? And I said to him, go, like, you need to leave. And by the way, take everything that you have purchased yourself. And I said, you're taking your undies and you're taking the kids' telly. You're not taking anything else, because, like, everything in this home I have bought. Like, it's not whether I paid for it, but I have bought it. Like, I've physically bought it. Like, I've even physically chosen this house. And it was like, and I mean, he's a really great man. He's like, I'm not leaving. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I mean, it was just, it's one of those moments but it just kind of shows, like, how different, like, the different roles that you have within a partnership. But I think getting aligned on those from the start, really.
Yeah.
And then I think as a woman, right, just being not brave, right, but understanding how your partner was raised and their expectations as well, of how you might raise children and the roles that you play. Because with the two of us, one of us has stepped forward into more child caring stuff. One of us has stepped more into career. We've kind of done a bit of a dance along the way. And then now, because I've got 2 boys and they're like a small club, and, I'm not required most of the time, to be honest, which is I'm quite happy with. No, I am kidding. My hubby just went away for a couple of days, and the kids were like, do you know where the kitchen is? Because he actually does a lot of the cooking.
Okay. Yeah.
And, I'm quite proud that I managed to keep everyone alive for a few days. And, the kids were funny, right? Because they were like, oh, this is better than Dad's. And I was like, you do realize I've just heated this food up, don't you? And, Dad just heats up this food. Like, it's not that there's no culinary expertise that's gone in here. So,
well, it's interesting, because I've got another friend, for example, 2 friends have mentioned this to me in the last month, actually. So one of them went away for work and the other one went away for a holiday. And both of them spent a disproportionate amount of time setting things up before they went, which, logistically, whatever. But then the other friend of mine pre-cooked 7 meals, pre-made 7 lunchboxes, all this kind of stuff ahead of her holiday away. And I sort of thought that was interesting, right? And I don't know, and I'm not privy to their labor split in their relationship, but it kind of struck me as interesting, because I think it's a problem when one partner can't actually step away and not have the expectation that the labor that they would otherwise done will actually just get done on top of the existing labor. You know, I find it a little strange. And listen, my son's only almost 1, so perhaps maybe that will change. But I just think it's interesting that I feel like probably what's going on, I'm hypothesizing here, but I feel like there's an unwritten expectation that that's fine for you to take on vacation, but before you go, just do 90% of the unpaid labor ahead of time. Do you know? And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't think I feel good about it.
I've never wanted to be that person that's got to leave a list before I go anywhere, or I've got to, do you know what I mean? Like, and so, and I've never kind of set that up in my life. Like, and I think, you know, what you talked about before, right? If you've got 50-50 care of your children, then you should know those things. You should know that swimming's on a Monday night and this is the time, and this is the bag. Because otherwise you're walking around in your own home with your eyes closed.
Well, I do think as well, though, I think a lot of this is like, it's very easy to sit here and go like, oh, how ridiculous. But I think, you know, all of us are a product of our experiences, and we're all a product of the biases that we have seen growing up, that we saw with our parents. I was the same. I had to iron dad's shirts for business trips. I wasn't as smart as you. I didn't ask as many questions as you, and I should have, you know, and I think we've seen it in the media. We still see it in the press. We see it in some of our politicians, the expectations, some of the policies that come out that are not, you know, fair and equitable. And so what I would love to say to your listeners is to, like, I think it's important that we question everything. And like, why have we always done it that way? Why do I make lunches 7 days in advance when I take a girls' trip? Like, why do I do that? Do I need to do that? Have I been asked to do that? Or do I actually just think there's a societal expectation that I will do that because otherwise I'm a bad mother? Or actually, like, I just think we should question that. And I also want to acknowledge that there's privilege, that there is privilege to be able to say, well, I'm not doing that, or I'm actually going to outsource that. And I understand that. But I do think one thing that we can all do is question, you know, and just like second guess stuff. And also I think sometimes the other thing that is very powerful, and as women, we've never been given permission to do this a lot of the time in our upbringing, is to actually set a boundary and say, I'm actually going to let that ball drop. Tiffany DeFoo talks about this. She has an amazing book. She has an amazing organization called The Crew, and she has an amazing book called Dropping the Ball, I think. I can't remember the exact name. I'll find it. We can put it in the show notes for you. But she talks about, in life, as a woman, you got a lot of balls that you're juggling, right? And she talks about how some of those balls are glass. So your health, your family's health, if that ball drops, it shatters and it's not a good scene. But some balls, if you're juggling and if a bouncy ball drops, listen, it's not ideal. The juggling act doesn't look as good, but it'll bounce and it'll kind of recover. So I kind of think that's how I think about like the school lunches or like making the meals in advance. Like if you don't do that, it's a bit annoying for your partner, and maybe, you know, maybe the kids get pizza or maybe they don't eat exactly what they would otherwise eat. But like, does everything fall over and is it a massive disaster? Or could you actually do that as a way of sort of like saying, this is actually a boundary that occasionally I'm not going to be doing that, you know?
Yeah. Or just giving you a heads up, I'm going to go away with the girls. And so therefore, you know, these are the things that you're going to need to do. But it's, you know, I suppose it's all like, you know, every relationship's different as well. I think the really important one in this conversation is actually around childcare. And when a woman's wanting to return to work and you want to put your children into childcare, or you want to get a nanny, or that, the kind of the equation of, well, it costs as much as your salary, and so therefore it's better for you to stay home. And they don't include the male salary in that as well, and go, it just seems to go on the woman's salary rather than the couple's salary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I observe this. It's funny. I live in America. I've lived in America for a bit over 6 years now, a bit more than 6 years. And it's actually I observe it to be quite different here, actually. I find that, or I observe anecdotally, that in Australia, the good news is there's more paid parental leave. In America, for example, a lot of women go back to work after 2 weeks, which is pretty extraordinary and scary, actually. And there's a great campaign by Glamour magazine over here, whose editor-in-chief is a dear friend of mine. They're doing amazing campaigning to try and change that. So let's hope that they can get somewhere on the policy side. But when it comes to the split of salary post having children or having caring responsibilities, there's a really great study done by Grace Papers, which is a fabulous organization based in Melbourne. Prue Gilbert is the head of that organization. And actually, if one person takes time out of the workforce for caring responsibilities of children, the ideal scenario would be for both parents to actually go part-time in an ideal world. And I know that this isn't always possible. So let's say dad's earning 100. I'm going to assume, for the purpose of this example, I'm going to use a heterosexual couple. Let's say dad earns 100,000 and mum earns 80 grand. So it's like, well, rather than pay a nanny, why don't you just take 2 years off and then we'll get them to daycare and then it's all fine. So the actual better, because in theory, when you look at that equation, that makes sense. As a family, I earn $20,000 more, so I'll just keep working and you can leave the workforce for those few years. But what Grace Papers actually found is that actually, if both carers step back to say 3 or 4 days a week, that's actually better in the long run. Sure, in the short term, the family may go backwards a little for 2 or 3 years, but if you map that over 5 to 10 years, the family trajectory earning-wise will be significantly higher, because one partner hasn't got a massive 2-year gap on their resume. And so both of their careers go a little bit back, but not massively back. And then they're able to sort of ramp back up and accelerate back up. There's not that skill gap. So it's really, I don't think it should just be an assumption that the lower earner or whatever leaves the workforce. I actually think, again, we need to question that assumption and have a really considered conversation about what could this look like? What if we blew it up and did it differently? What if we proactively, and I know, again, this isn't always possible, but what if we proactively both sought to get part-time jobs, 4-day-a-week jobs, remote jobs, so that actually both of our careers in the long run can be hugely successful? But again, I just feel like it's hard. These things are really hard to juggle, right? We've just gone through it ourselves. So I know it's not easy, but I love to like to sort of challenge everyone to question.
Yeah.
Why is that the assumption,
And someone that I've worked with, her and her partner are actually doing that. They're both doing 4 days a week, I think you can still do a really meaty role at 4 days a week. I think it's when it becomes kind of, and this is from working in corporates for a long time, this sort of idea, 3 days becomes a little bit more challenging from, say, a corporation perspective, but 4 days is really, really workable. But I think, but it's also like, and so I think we've moved on. So when I had my children, I was actually earning more than my husband, but it was the assumption that I would be out of work for a year.
Right.
Yes, it was. And look, yes, it was what I wanted to do, but actually financially, we would have been better for him to, step back and to be the key caregiver for the children, for both of our children. But it was kind of this, I think, if I was looking at it today, I'd have a different mindset about that. I would have taken a period of time and then maybe gone back to the workforce. But I did enjoy raising my children as well for that period of time.
Of course, it's such a pleasure, isn't it? And it's such every moment that I have with Hugo is such a joy. And he's actually just had the dreaded foot in mouth disease, which I'm sure a lot of parents, is that what it's called? That's what they call it over here anyway.
Hand and mouth,
hand and mouth, not foot in mouth, hand and mouth disease. And
did you get it though? That's the problem.
Well, not yet, fingers crossed. But what's interesting was it happened on a weekend, so that was fine. And then I had to take him to the doctor on a Monday, but I could do that because I work for myself. And so it's very easy for me to adjust things. And again, what a privilege. Like I can only empathize with your listeners who are working to other folks' schedule.
Yeah.
That's just a nightmare. And like planning and daycare, it's just like, it's a real problem. And I know that Georgie Dent with the Parenthood in Australia is doing amazing work again to advocate to get more accessible, affordable childcare options within Australia, which I think is so crucial for the benefit of the economy and productivity, but also for families and particularly for women. And as you know, Samantha, like during COVID, the gender pay gap got worse. Women left the workforce in huge numbers disproportionately because of those caring responsibilities when there was no schools that were open and stuff like that. Like in some cases, the only option was, and I would assume again that the expectation in large part was that, again, in heterosexual relationships, that the female would reduce their hours or leave the workforce to help care for the kids who are at home. And so we actually saw those data points in terms of the gender pay gap get a hell of a lot worse during COVID, largely because of those reasons.
I think if you had small children during COVID, you really struggled. Like, mine were a bit older, but even my 12-year-old would have been 9 or 10. We were a bit like, if you learn anything at school today, that would be a good outcome. He actually started to gain, and he actually started to realize that he really didn't need to do too much unless we got an email from school asking for something. So he kind of even learned the new rules of the new environment as
my
well.
uncle used to say, if you get more than 51%, you've worked too hard.
I love that. I love that. I say to my current 15-year-old, if you do well in year 12, you've got more choices. That's kind of it. If you don't, you'll find a way. But if you do well, it might be a little bit easier.
Yeah, easier pathway potentially. Yeah.
Well, we've covered 100 topics there,
haven't we? We've just had a really rambling convo. I'm loving this.
It's good. Now, tell me though a little bit about your background and how you started PepTalkHer as well. So just sort of take me through that.
Yeah. So I grew up on a farm on the Gold Coast in the hinterland out there. Shout out to any Queenslanders listening today.
What sort of farm? What sort of farm?
Well, it was really a hobby farm. So my father grew up on a cane and banana farm in Wollongbar. Well, Condong, so a little further south. Mum was in Wollongbar as a kid. So we had when I grew up, we had horses and chooks and sheep and all that kind of stuff, platypus in the creek. And randomly, I ended up doing journalism and business because when I was in year 12, I had a lot of choices. Fortunately, I had good grades, had a lot of choices. And I was looking at the massive book of things you could do. I was I guess that one, that looks good. So I did journalism and business and became a journo quite by accident. And so worked in Oz at Channel 10, Channel 7, SBS Dateline, all around the place. And then went to London and worked for the BBC World over there. So I was a foreign correspondent for about 15 years. And at one point in my career, I lived in a bunch of different countries, in and out of Zimbabwe, the Philippines, Syria, countries like that, covering conflicts and interviewing really fascinating people, everything from Brad Pitt to Bashar al-Assad, and loved my job, but didn't love the fact that I was paid less than the dudes in the newsroom, who sat next to me. And for my sins, I said something because I thought that's what you did, because that's what we were told. If you see something, say something. And so I did, and it didn't go down well. They were basically like, you should be lucky to have this job. You should be grateful. If you don't like it, why don't you quit or take us to court? And I was like, all right. All right. Because I was just like, are you kidding me? Really? You can't do that. You can't, firstly, it's illegal. Secondly, it's wrong. And thirdly, don't tempt me. I will take you to court. And I didn't, but I did get a lawyer though, which is a very stressful situation for anyone listening who's ever had to go through a legal battle with an employer. I would not recommend it. And yet I did feel very strongly that I actually had to go through that process because I had savings. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have children. So I could. And I was like, imagine if I was pregnant, or imagine if I was the breadwinner. I would just have to suck it up and deal with this. So I kind of felt like I had the responsibility because I kind of could. And I knew I'd get another job. I wasn't worried about that. So anyway, that's kind of really where my journey to get to New York began, was because of that experience. So it's funny how with hindsight, shitty things that happen in your career, actually, for me anyway, with hindsight, I'm grateful for them because it's actually led me to be here. Yeah. It was a catalyst to be like, well, how can I fix this? And sadly, I can't fix it on my own. As you know, Samantha, we've talked about this before, is to close the gender pay gap, we need multiple levers. We need government policy to change. We need business policy to change. And then where we work at PepTalkHer, which is the business that I founded, we really work at the grassroots level. Yes, we do advocacy, and yes, we work in-house with business. So I suppose we work on the business side too, but really we mobilize our community. We have about 65,000 professional women in the PepTalkHer community. We have an app that's totally free for all listening folks to download. It's called PepTalkHer. It's on Apple and Android. It's kind of like a period tracking app, except instead of tracking your cycle, it tracks your wins at work. Yeah. Right. So it kind of is like a brag book. It's like a digital brag book where you can kind of put all of those successes, so that when it's performance review time, you have data, you have examples to back up your case for a raise or a promotion or whatever. Because as I'm sure you saw in corporate Australia, what we see is that there is a gender pay gap, and it's perpetuated in large part because of the biases that exist, right? And so we're trying to give people the information and the data so that they can really set themselves up for success, to confidently have those conversations with, you know, the meat on the bone, to be like, yes, I want a promotion. Yes, I want a pay raise. And here's the 3 reasons why. You know, percentage increase, blah, 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 example here, feedback from a client here, so that it's really easy for the other party to say yes. So yeah, that's a bit about what we do.
I love it. And, you know, it's interesting when you talk about like that bias, right? Because I've caught myself having my own bias about women as well, and making assumptions. You know, I've had 2 people come into a meeting, 1 man, 1 female. Well, sorry, 1 man, 1 female, and assume that he's the owner of the business, when that's not the case. She's the owner of the business. Do you know what I mean? I've caught myself as well.
Well, I mean, listen, here's an exercise we can all do, right? Like, if everyone listening wants to close their eyes, except if you're driving, do not close your eyes. But like, just imagine, like, let's imagine, what do you think a fighter pilot looks like? You know, what does a landscaper look like in your mind? What image or what person do you know who does, like, what comes to mind? And 9 times out of 10, when people think about a fighter pilot, they think about a man in uniform. You know, and that's because we all have unconscious bias, right? Regardless of our background, we all have unconscious bias. And so it's a practice that we all have to step into, to actively work to rewire those biases that don't serve us and certainly don't serve society, right? And so having conversation and being aware of that is the first step. So I love that you openly acknowledge that you've had that, you know, you've just made an assumption before. Like, we had, I'll give you an example. We've got a pool. We were having the pool opens the other day. I did the same thing. I said, what time's he coming over? Like, just because you're opening, like, you know, you're able to fix pools and do them and all that technical stuff, which I'm no good at, doesn't mean that, like, why would I assume that? And yet I did, you know, and this is the stuff that I talk about all the time. And I made that assumption as well. And I'm not proud of it. But it's good to catch yourself and be like, it could be anyone who owns a pool cleaning and pool opening company. Why did I assume that they identified as male, you know?
Yeah. I can't tell you the amounts of time in business as well. I've had someone say to me, what does your husband do? Like, I've met someone at an event, or I've met someone, and I mean, I've never asked a man, what does your partner, what does your wife do? Or what does your partner do? Or do you know what I mean? Like, just those questions.
Well, I even had an experience. We're moving house at the moment, and the application for the rental property, it only had information, one person's information. So I filled it out with my information. In America, you have to earn 40 times the rent to qualify to get the lease. Anyway, which I do on my own salary. So I was like, this is fine. I'll just fill it out. It's all good. So I was texting with the real estate broker yesterday, and I was like, hey, what's the update? Like, when are we moving in, basically? And he was like, yeah, just one question. What does your partner do?
Yeah.
I was like, that's a weird. And then what does he earn? I was like, but I qualify for this house on my own merits. Like, that's kind of irrelevant. And I was saying to Ryan, I was like, I bet if you were the person on the application, you wouldn't have said, oh, what does Meggie do? What does she earn? No way.
Yeah.
It's insane. It enrages me.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at my questions going, okay, what do I ask?
We've gone off piste. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I can cut this bit out. So when you mentioned around you work at the grassroots level, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So a lot of the women, you know, we specifically help professional women who are looking to get paid more and promoted faster and navigate the highs and lows of their career, right? And to help them along the way. And so what we're able to do is help support people to firstly back themselves.
Yes.
Believe in themselves, because unfortunately that's often not at the level where it should be. All these amazing women doing these amazing things, achieving all these stuff. And yet they'll say to me, oh, but like, it's not even that amazing. I was like, are you kidding me? You're managing how many millions of dollars in ad spend? And they're like, yeah, but it's like not even a big thing. And I'm like, yeah, no, like that is a big thing. And you are very good at your job. And so a lot of what we do is like helping people to understand and to reprogram their mindset around their own worth. So it's really about understanding their worth and being confident in the worth and the value that they're bringing to the workplace. And then the second thing that we do is help them like navigate how to go about asking for a pay raise, because you can ask for a raise and you can ask for a raise, right? Like you can go in there and you can be like, hey, just wanted to talk to you. Like, I'd love to get a pay increase this year. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's polite. It kind of ticks all the boxes, but it's a very different conversation, if you walk in there and say, hey, I'm really excited to discuss my future with the business. As you know, in the past 6 months, I've increased our website clicks by 12% year on year. I've retained the major client of Coca-Cola, and I've personally hired 2 folks from my network. So we've not paid recruiter costs, which is amazing. That saved the business 60 grand. So with that in mind, I would love to talk to you about my compensation moving forward into 2024.
Nice. And you've got to do that
yeah.
before, because we all know that anyone in a leadership role gets this is the money that you can use to increase everyone's salaries. You might have 10, 20, 100, 200 people in your team, and that money gets portioned against those people based on percentages, based on your impression of what they've done. And so if you're walking into the office ahead of that time, giving that information, then that person they can give you 1%, they can give you 4%, they can give you 10%, they can give you anything they like, as long as it's within that bucket of money. Yeah, basically.
And you can't control the bucket of money that your boss gets.
Correct.
You can't personally control the entire trajectory of the business's profit and loss statement. You can't control the economy. There's a lot we can't control. So when it comes to your career, the only thing really that you can control is how you show up. How you show up day to day, how you prepare to have those conversations, how you do the groundwork throughout the year to make sure that your boss is very aware. Like, you know, if you've managed to retain a client who wanted to leave and you've worked really hard and you've fostered them and you've figured it out and they're not going to leave the business, if you've done all that work and your boss doesn't know, like, did it even happen?
Did it?
You know, so like you've got to be having these conversations regularly and just being like, hey, this is kind of something amazing that I did. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share with you that this happened. Wow, the team and I did this. Like, it's just, you've got to kind of keep that comms going throughout the year. You can't just like save it all up for your one performance review conversation. It's too late. And then when you're in those conversations, to your point, they've got a budget. You have to make it easy for them to say yes. You've got to make it easy for you to be the person that does get the big allocation. And the way that you do that is by preparing. And preparing the night before or 20 minutes before the conversation is like fine-ish, but it's not amazing. And so if you want an amazing increase and if you want an amazing title bump, you've got to put in the work ahead of time. And, you know, like 5 minutes before, 12 hours before, it's not enough. You've really got to prepare. So that's really what we help folks do, is we step them through that process so that they're ready and able. And, you know, like the people who we've got a heap of free resources that people can check out. The app is obviously free. And then we've got a really cool cheat sheet that helps you to earn more, which is at PepTalkHer.com/pay me more. But we also have a paid course, and folks who've been through our paid course are getting, like, I had a text the other day from someone who got a $14,000 increase. One of our students in a previous cohort, she got like $78,000 extra in her paycheck. So she's putting in a pool for her 2 daughters. Like, it's kind of like, you know, it's life-changing. Like, earning more money is life-changing, not because you necessarily need to go out and buy a Porsche, and you can if that's what your heart's desire, you know, at some point, but because you can choose to put in a pool for your kids. You can choose to take a 6-month sabbatical. You can choose to buy your mum a car. You know, you can choose to start investing, to start putting money into the stock market, to start angel investing, to support your favorite charity, to buy your first home. And those things open up more options for you and your family. And like, I just get so excited about that. And so I want everyone listening to, like, I want you to get paid what you're worth. Because if there's money on the table, why don't you take it and do cool shit in the world with it, you know?
And then you've got choices. And then the other thing is you understand your value. So if you don't get that pay rise, then you understand, I'm not supposed to be here anymore. And in actual fact, I need to go somewhere else. Because that's like, you hit that ceiling potentially. Or particularly, you know, some people will get told, like, you're at the top of the band. We couldn't possibly pay more, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, then I'll go somewhere else, really.
Well, firstly, what do you need me to do to get to the next band? Can you make a one-off exception, given that I'm exceptional talent and I know you want to retain me in the business? Would you be open to a new model whereby, if this is the only salary you can give me, I'm disappointed, but I've got another idea. How about, you know, we agree that you paid me 5% on any extra money that I bring in above X amount? Like, again, do the mental gymnastics ahead of time, come up with creative options, present them so that it's easy for them to say yes, or let me consider that. Let me run this up the food chain. Instead of just being like, this is bullshit. I didn't get the pay rise that I wanted. You know, like it's like, yeah. Or say, listen, I'm really disappointed. You can't move me within the band. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And they might say, well, listen, we're not supposed to say anything, but actually we're laying off 30% of the staff next week. So like, just be grateful you've got a job. All right, good. That's good intel. I would rather that they tell me that, you know, so you've got to ask questions and try and like navigate the situation. It's not always black and white, you know?
Know the objections or scenario plan
objection handling. Yeah.
Nice. Very good. Let's talk about insights and trends that you're observing regarding the evolving landscape of gender equality in the workplace.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason that I moved to the United States about 6 years ago was because the conversation around gender equality and the importance of that in the workplace, I felt at that time was more progressed here in the United States. Question mark as to whether that went backwards, given the political tumultuousness of the past few years. But I will say that, you know, for example, some of the stock exchanges here, you actually can't list a company unless you've got women on your board, for example. So there are things in place here that I think are great things, because we're seeing corporate America very intentionally steer in the direction towards diversity, not because it's the right thing to do necessarily, not because it's a warm and fuzzy, but because they know that profit goes up. And this is the thing that, like, it kind of frustrates me, like all these haters who are like, it's fake news, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, listen, if you're a capitalist, which most Americans are, if you are a capitalist, if you have retirement savings, if you have investments, you should give a shit about gender equality. Because when companies have diversity at the leadership decision-making table, decisions are better. You know, obstacles are seen much earlier, you know, and net profit goes up. And so you should care about these things, you know, like no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, if you want to make more money, you should care about it. And so we're seeing trends. And like, for example, in California, there are moves in certain states, California being one of them, to transparently share salary discrepancies within businesses, which I know Australia is about to do, which is great. One of the other things that's happened over here more recently, which I think is very powerful from a gender equality perspective, is the Speak Out Act was passed, which basically means that people who had experiences of assault or harassment in the workplace are no longer beholden to their NDAs, their non-disclosure agreements that have previously for a long time forced them to remain silent for legal reasons. So, you know, I think the conversation is progressing, and it's a good thing because it's giving women more agency, and it's allowing them to speak their truth. And the more that we hear those stories, honestly, the more we're able to hold these individuals and certainly these companies to account, so that hopefully going forward, it will be a better experience for women in the workplace. And anyone, frankly, from an underrepresented background, you know, because I think when we talk about all of these things, like when we look at the gender pay gap in the Western world, you know, more or less, it's around 20%, depending on which country, depending on how you crunch the numbers. Those numbers are way worse for women of color, like significantly, horrendously worse. And so this is a conversation for all of us to get involved in, because actually all of us have the ability to be allies for others. Whether you identify as male or female, like whatever, we all have a responsibility to support other people in the workplace to make it a better environment for them.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, it's so bang on the mark. Do you know what I mean? So it's just, it's overdue. And, you know, we talked about at the start, you know, it being a couple of 100 years or that's what the United Nations says. We're looking at least 100 years before equality. Like I'm just not going to wait around for that. Like I don't want to just sort of sit there, wait for the 0.3% change year on year. Like I'm here to kind of make bigger momentous change. And I believe that if we start to talk about money, if we talk strategically about the strategies that we can put in place to very cleverly, carefully have those conversations about pay, about title, that actually these ripples of change that we're seeing in the PepTalker community, people getting $5,000, $15,000. We've had 4 people get 100K plus pay increases
like the ripples of change that will create, I believe, and I'm hoping, and with podcasts like this and conversations like this, like eventually will lead to that tidal wave of change so that we can get that 100-year number down more quickly, because it's just like, I can't, like, it's like 2023. Haven't we got better things to talk about? You know, like
completely.
Yeah.
Final words for the listeners. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, listen, like, I don't be a stranger. I'm on LinkedIn, Meggie Palmer. I'm on all of the socials at PepTalkHer. Like, say hi, tell me that you listen to this podcast. I would love to connect. I'd love to hear your stories. And, I would say to everyone, like, you need to be your own best advocate. Your boss is busy. They've got however many direct reports. They've got maybe a sick kid. Maybe they're going through a divorce. Maybe they're buying a house. Who knows? They've got all of these things going on. So you can't expect that they're going to steer your career in the way that you would love them to. You really have to take responsibility and ownership of that. And have those conversations. Ask for a pay increase every single year. They might say no, but you've got to ask every single year, because for better or worse, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, so you've got to be the one asking. And if you see something in the workplace that's not right, that's not equitable, if people are mansplaining folks, if if someone in the workplace more junior than you asks you, like, what should I ask for this salary? Be brave, be courageous, be open about what you earn, what you're earning now. Like, let's transparently start to share this information. Information is power, and it will allow other people to have more agency in their negotiations as well.
Love it, Meggie. Thank you so much for being on the show. As I mentioned, I've been following you for a while, and I love the PepTalk, and we all just need to step forward, change the system.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, and pay it forward to someone else, like this. Here we go. Here's a little challenge. We weren't planning this, but a little challenge for the weekend. Like, have a conversation about your salary with someone in your life, your sister, your auntie, your best friend, your roommate. I don't care who it is. Have a conversation, a real conversation, dollars and cents.
Yeah, tell
about
them,
money.
Yeah, have a chat to them. And I think that's really great advice. Understand, for your role in the organization that you work for, are you being paid equitably? Or should you be being paid more, for sure? Yeah.
And it's okay to ask. If you ask for more, the world does not stop spinning. It doesn't. If you ask and your boss is like horrendously rude about it, it probably tells you something about them and potentially the culture of the organization. It's not about you. If you ask, you can be polite, all those sorts of things. You can prepare in advance. You can have data points, research, which we talk about more in the PepTalker program and stuff. But like, it's okay to ask. There's nothing wrong with asking the question, If
you don't ask, you don't know.
Totally. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Excited to stay in touch.